I was a police officer until I saw a man disappear inside the police station cell. To this day, I can't sleep with the lights off. It's not fear of the dark. It's fear of what exists in silence, fear of what disappears without explanation, of what slips through the cracks of reality while everyone pretends they didn't see it. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night with my throat dry and my body in a cold sweat, as if I'd run for miles, as if something had touched me in my sleep. But the room is empty, too quiet, and that's exactly what scares me. The absence of sound, of presence, of meaning. Because that night, everything was silent. What happened to me has no manual. It can't be learned in academia. It doesn't fit into any protocol. They told me it was stress, that I should take a vacation, take care of my mind, sleep more. But how does one sleep after seeing the impossible with their own eyes? How do you close your eyes knowing that, in some dark corner of your memory, there is a cell where a man disappeared, in front of me? His face still haunts me, not because of his features, those are already blurred in my mind, but because of the way he looked at me, as if he already knew, as if he had been waiting for this moment, as if somehow he no longer belonged there, or in this world. I replayed the images hundreds of times, frame by frame. He was there, sitting, then standing, then nothing, no movement, no visible system failure, no door opening, no key. Turning, just emptiness, a sharp cut in logic, and yet they insist that he ran away, that someone made a mistake, that the system failed. But I saw it. I was there. I breathed in that heavy air. I smelled rusty metal, mold, something old. The sense that this place wasn't just concrete and iron. It was a kind of hole, a breaking point, a space where the normal rules didn't apply. I tried to forget. I tried to move on. I even asked for a transfer, but it was no use. The memory comes back in the most banal details. A flashing light, a hiss on the radio, a muffled sound in the hallway. Things that shouldn't affect me but now paralyze me, because it all started like that, small, almost imperceptible, as if something was just testing the limits of my perception, preparing me. And it is at this point, always at this point, that everything comes back. The memory pulls me hard. It drags me back to that stuffy October night. I remember the rain beating on the window bars, the damp papers on my desk, the cold cup of coffee. And I remember the exact moment they brought him in. No name, no document, no rush, as if he had been there before and was just coming back. Do you believe someone could just disappear from a place locked from the inside? No open doors, no windows, no sound, just emptiness. What happened in that cell will make you doubt even reality. And before things get even weirder, because they will, like and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot I still need to tell you, and no one else has had the courage to say it. I've never been too fond of silence, and that's exactly where I chose to spend most of my life. Working night shifts at a police station forgotten on the map, between a bar that closed too early and a main street that was almost never busy after 10 o'clock. It wasn't out of vocation or cheap heroism. It was routine. And for me, routine was the only way to silence what haunted me when everything got too quiet. My name is Daniel. I worked as a police officer for almost 20 years in that city, where everyone knows everyone else, where mothers still shout from their balconies when their children are out, and where the biggest scare, to some extent, was a cat knocking over a trash can. At least that's what I told myself. I was the kind of guy who solved everything with a "let's stay calm" message, even when others were on the verge of an attack. My colleagues nicknamed me Cold, not in the sense of cruel, but of someone who doesn't get shaken, someone who doesn't believe easily, who isn't impressed by noise on the radio, by shadows in the alley, by stories of ghosts in the old cemetery. And this reputation served me well, to be honest. It gave me distance from things. It protected me, because no one asks too many questions to a guy who never feels anything. No one imagines that maybe he learned to keep quiet out of fear of what might happen when his voice breaks. But inside me, everything was boiling in a way that I never let on. Since I was 13, since the day my older brother Leandro disappeared, on the way between school and our house, a distance of less than 2 blocks, 2 familiar streets, 3 neighbors, no cameras, no trace. He left class with his uniform still wrinkled and disappeared in the middle of the afternoon. It was summer. The sun was shining. There were people on the sidewalks. and no one saw a thing. I was only 11 at the time, and I remember everything with a clarity that hurts. The way my mother grabbed the landline phone as if she could call my brother back, the smell of beans burning in the pan because she forgot to put them on the stove, waiting for him to arrive, my father's voice trembling but trying to sound firm when he spoke to the first police officers. Then came the silence, first the one that settles in when the neighbors stop talking, then the silence inside the house, the one that corrodes, the one that grows in the corners. The police did what they could. That's what they said. That's what I heard too many times. That's what made me want to put on that uniform years later, not out of vocation, but out of revenge, thinly disguised as a sense of justice. I needed to understand what happens after a person disappears. I needed to infiltrate the system that failed my family, and most of all, I needed to prevent anyone else from going unanswered. That's what I said. But the truth, even though I'm reluctant to admit it, is that a part of me still believed that at some point, perhaps by chance, I would find a clue, a name, a loose thread, something that would lead me back to him. But real life doesn't work like the movies. Cases aren't solved with dramatic discoveries. Most of them drag on, get lost in the files, become dusty paper in a locked drawer. And that's where I grew up, inside a police station that smelled of stale coffee and sweat from the uniform. I learned to ignore stories of ghosts, presences, figures on the road, and other delusions that the early morning usually brings into the police station when the city sleeps. But fatigue leaves gaps, and even the most skeptical of men begins to see things when their eyes are exposed to the darkness for too long. When you spend so much time alone in a place, you begin to notice details that you had missed before. The door that creaks more than it should, the light in the back room that never burns but always flickers, the footsteps that sometimes seem to come from inside the cell, even when it is empty. And yet I heard none of it, because listening meant making room, and making room meant allowing fear to speak to me again. And I had spent my whole life trying to keep it quiet. My routine was simple. I always arrived a little before 11 at night. I was on duty until 6, but in practice I stayed until sunrise, because I knew there would be nothing waiting for me at home. My wife left me 5 years ago, not because I was a bad man, but because I was an absent man. Physically present but emotionally so distant that she felt like a widow of someone alive. I never blamed her. She only verbalized what I denied, that I was trapped in a story that never ended. At the police station, I kept the reception light on, the radio on at a barely noticeable volume, and a thermos of lukewarm coffee. Sometimes I would make rounds of the cells, even without prisoners, just to fill the void. The corridor leading to the cells had a strong smell of disinfectant and old paint, and the floor, worn in the center, betrayed the years of coming and going of those who had passed through there. And it was in this space that my mind, from time to time, betrayed my reason. There was one night in particular, just before what would happen next, and I swear this is true, when I felt like someone was breathing too close to me. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything, but I felt it. A sudden heat on the back of my neck, like when someone approaches you from behind in silence. I turned quickly. No one was there. And yet my hair stood on end, and my body reacted as if it were in danger. My hand instinctively went to my gun, and that shames me to this day, not because I was scared, but because, for a second, I was exactly the kind of cop I've always criticized. The one who lets fear get the better of me. But fear, when real, doesn't need logic. It just needs space. And in that police station, at that time, in that tired body, he had plenty of space. The funny thing is that no matter how much I denied it all during the day, at night, something inside me would open up. Maybe it was the tiredness. Maybe it was the silence reminding me of who I really was. A man marked by absence. Someone who built a life on an unanswered question. Someone who, even wearing a uniform, never had control over anything. Not over what he lost, nor over what he was about to lose again. And it was during one of those silent shifts, in the early hours of the morning when everything seemed exactly the same as all the others, that someone rang the doorbell. One of those bells that you know, deep down, will change something, because the sound of it sounded different. A second longer, a strange echo, and a weight in the air. A weight that only those who have lost someone know, and that for some reason that I couldn't explain at the time, crushed my chest again. That shift had all the makings of being just another one among many. The early morning was warm, stuffy, as if the air carried something that didn't want to go down my throat. I had been at the reception for about 3 hours, my coffee cup forgotten by my side, my eyes burning with tiredness. The last calls from the radio were minor things, a couple arguing on the corner of the bakery, a report of loud music in the São Lucas neighborhood. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that required more than patience. And yet, there was something about that night that bothered me. The entire station seemed to breathe differently. Sounds echoed more slowly, as if the hallways were longer. The light in the lobby, which normally flickered every now and then, seemed to pulse more frequently. And I swear it wasn't paranoia. It was like being in a room someone had just left, still warm, still charged with presence. It was around 2:43 a.m. when the police car arrived. I recognized the sound of the tires even before I heard the engine turn off. 2 short knocks on the front door, the standard for someone who doesn't want to alarm someone. I got up, unlocked the door, and came face to face with Almeida, a rookie who spoke few words, with his uniform stained with mud and a sweaty forehead. He was panting, his eyes restless, and right behind him came the man. It wasn't exactly what you'd expect from someone who caused a disturbance. He walked slowly, his gaze fixed on some invisible point ahead. He was thin, too pale, his hair plastered to his forehead from the night's humidity. He wore a dress shirt that looked like it had once been white, now soaked with sweat and dirt. His shoes were worn, with no laces. But what really caught my attention was the look in his eyes. It wasn't fear or anger. It was, how should I put it, like someone who sees something no one else sees, like someone who's been there before. "We caught him in the alley of the old tire shop," Almeida said quietly, almost as if he were afraid the man would hear. He was talking to himself, looking up at the sky, saying they were coming, that they were already close. A resident called, scared. When we tried to approach him, he ran, but it wasn't normal. He hid in a place where there was no way to hide. I stood in silence for a few seconds, watching. The man was standing in the middle of the hall, staring at the wall as if it was saying something. I approached slowly, protocol ingrained in my gesture. "Full name?" I asked. He didn't respond. He didn't even blink. "Do you have any documents with you?" "Nothing." "Are you listening to me?" It was then that he slowly turned his head, his eyes fixed on mine, and he said, in a tone so calm that it seemed rehearsed, "They're coming. You don't have much time." His voice, it was dry, worn, like he'd been yelling all night, but his tone was soft, almost listless. It gave me chills, not because the words made sense, but because something about the way he said them made them seem true. "Who's coming?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral, but he had already turned his gaze to the corner of the room as if I wasn't there. We tried to make eye contact, we tried to make conversation, we told him to empty his pockets. Nothing. No aggressive reaction, but no cooperation either. It was like trying to interrogate a reflex. Nothing about him seemed to react as it should. He didn't shake, he didn't sweat, he didn't ask for a phone number, he didn't demand a lawyer, he didn't say a word beyond that. "Sentence." We put him in the back cell, number 3, the furthest away, not by protocol but by instinct. I even offered to accompany him. During the short walk between the reception and the corridor of cells, he uttered a phrase that still haunts me today, like an echo in the deepest part of my mind. "The cell will remember me." At the time, I laughed inside. It was absurd. Maybe he was someone with mental disorders, maybe a drug user, or just another person lost on the road of life. And yet, the way he said it made me slow down, as if he was telling a story I already knew. We locked the cell. We double-checked. Lock, bolt, surveillance system. Everything was fine. There was no reason to worry. At least, that's what I wanted to believe. I went back to the control room and stared at the camera screen for a few moments. He was sitting on the concrete bed, his hands in his lap, his eyes fixed on the wall in front of him, not moving, not blinking, not seeming to be part of the world. I took a deep breath, trying to push away the discomfort, but something inside me knew that this wasn't going to end like the other cases, that this man hadn't come for nothing, that there was something more. And there, in that instant when he looked at me through the camera, without knowing or perhaps knowing exactly where it was, I felt for the first time in many years something close to fear. But what bothered me most wasn't what he said. That's what he was. I hadn't said it yet. Have you ever looked at someone and felt like they were just waiting for the right moment to show you what they were capable of? The night seemed thicker than usual. The kind of night when the air doesn't enter your lungs properly, when the silence weighs on your chest as if it were carrying something that no one can name. I tried to focus on the reports piled up on the reception desk, old scribbles, closed cases, paperwork that meant nothing and served more to distract me than to be of any practical use. The white light of the fluorescent lamp above me flickered from time to time like a silent warning, as if it were about to go out for good. I should have changed that bulb weeks ago, but the truth is that for some reason I avoided admitting I liked its instability. It kept me awake, alert. The clock read 3:27 a.m., the moment when dawn seems to hold its breath. Outside, not even the wind blew anymore. No cars, no living souls. The kind of silence that, if you pay attention, starts to show you sounds that shouldn't be there, like the subtle hiss of the radio of the police car parked on the side of the building. It started out soft, almost imperceptible, an intermittent hiss, as if something was trying to cross the frequency. I got up and walked to the door. The station yard was empty except for patrol car number 4, which was parked under the awning. The radio inside was on. This was unusual. We always turned everything off after the last return. I approached slowly. The driver's door was ajar. The noise was coming from there. I opened it wide and pulled over. The moment I touched the radio to turn it off, it hissed louder, not static, but something weirder, lower, almost a whisper, something like a cursed sentence trying to form, but too fast, too flawed. I slammed the door shut. The sound stopped immediately. A cold shiver ran down my spine, and I went back inside, trying not to think about it too much. I had had some strange nights. People were disoriented. Radios that picked up signals that were crossed with pirate radios, interference from repeaters. Nothing that could justify it, but everything was explainable, in theory. Even so, something was off. I sat back down in my chair, but I couldn't touch the papers anymore. My gaze went straight to the monitor screen that displayed the cameras in the cells. There he was, sitting still, his hands still in his lap, his shoulders relaxed, as if he were at home. But something was different. The eyes. Before, he was looking straight ahead, lost. Now he was looking straight at the camera, straight to me, as if he knew I was there, watching. I leaned forward, my eyes fixed on the garnet image on the screen, and then his lips began to move, slowly, soundlessly, almost as if he were speaking to his own mind. The first time I saw it, I thought it was some kind of tic, but then he did it again, and again. It's not here. It's now. The lips formed these words with a strange precision, a voiceless whisper, but it seemed to pass through me as if I heard it inside my head. It's not here, it's now. I looked at the microphone button in the cell. It was off. I turned it on. I put on the headset, and there it was, at voice del, low, constant, like a numb mantra. It's not here. It's now. It's not here. It's now. The tone of his voice did not match a troubled man. It was controlled, calmed, almost calculated, as if he were following an internal rhythm, as if those words had weight, as if they carried some hidden meaning that only he knew. It's not here, it's now. My stomach turned. Something told me this wasn't madness. It was a warning. I walked down the corridor of cells. Every step had a different reverberation that night, as if the floor was hollow, as if I were walking on something that shouldn't be touched. The emergency light on the ceiling, normally a milky white, blinked in a strange, irregular rhythm, and for a few moments it cast long, crooked shadows on the walls, shadows that didn't match anything around them. I arrived at cell 3, the bars were closed, the lock was intact, and there he was. Stand up now, facing me, 3 meters apart, separated by iron. But the way he looked at me, it made me feel like he was closer, much closer. You can feel it too, can't you? He said without raising his voice. I didn't answer. My throat was dry, my mouth was bitter. Only the sound of my shallow breathing filled the space. You feel like you've been here before, even if you don't remember. That sentence hit me in a strange way. It wasn't about me, I told myself. It was about him. He was projecting, speaking in code. But still, the sentence stuck to me like mold on a damp wall. He slowly turned around and sat back down. His head was down, his hands shaking now. For the first time, he looked fragile, human. But what really made me uncomfortable was the sound that echoed seconds later. A crack, small, dry, like the snap of a bone being moved in the joint. But it wasn't coming from him. It was coming from the wall next to the cell. I touched the wall. It was cold, colder than normal, almost damp. "It's not here. It's now," he repeated softly. I walked away. I walked slowly back to the control room. I closed the door and sat down. My heart was racing, my hands were sweaty. The monitor still showed him now hunched over, his hands on his face. I put the headphones back on and continued listening. The same sentence, like a broken clock that repeats the same second forever. "It's not here, it's now." I stood there listening, watching, waiting for I don't know what. But deep, deep down, I knew something was about to change. Something that I couldn't see was already here. The dawn was advancing with a suffocating slowness, the kind of time that doesn't pass, that creeps through the corridors like cold smoke. I was still in the control room, staring at that monitor with the same expression you have when you feel like you're witnessing something that shouldn't be happening, but you can't stop looking. He was there, sitting, quiet, still whispering the damn sentence, as if he were trapped in a cycle of memory or premonition. I didn't know anymore. Time seemed frozen. On the screen it hadn't moved in over 20 minutes, and yet it felt like movement, an invisible tension in the air, as if the walls were contracting around me, pushing everything into that corridor of cells. I took a deep breath, took off my headphones, stood up and walked over to the coffee maker. I poured another cup of lukewarm coffee that tasted like rust. My mouth was dry, my tongue bitter, as if my body was already trying to warn me that something was about to break. That's when I heard the sound. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but it was wrong. A metallic crack, short, then another, like iron hitting iron, only muffled, as if coming from inside a structure. My eyes went straight to the hallway. The cameras were working. Nothing unusual on the screens, but the sound persisted. I tiptoed back to the corridor of cells. Everything was as it had been before, at least at first glance. The lights continued to flicker irregularly, casting diagonal shadows that danced across the walls, as if they had a mind of their own. The corridor smelled musty and recently cleaned, that bittersweet smell that mixes disinfectant and old rust. I arrived in front of cell 3. The lock was in place. The bars were closed. The chain was intact, but the cell empty. The man was not there. For a second, just a second, my brain tried to fill the space with some rational justification. He was lying behind the concrete bench, hidden in a corner that was blind to the camera. But the cell had no blind corners, and even before I saw it for myself, I knew he wasn't there. The cell was empty, and there was no way that was possible. The metallic sound came again, closer this time. I turned sharply, my hand already going for the gun in my holster, but the hallway was empty and the sound stopped. I went back to the cell. I checked everything. The doorknob, the bolt, the wall structure. No sign of forced entry. No damage to the bars. No obvious flaws. Just absence. My breathing was heavy. My heartbeat was irregular. Sweat was running down my temples, even with the cold morning air touching my skin. I ran back to the monitoring room. I sat down in front of the screens and rewound the last few hours of the recording. From cell 3, there he was, sitting, whispering, moving a little. I slowly advanced the timeline. 2:47. He gets up. 2:49. He approaches the back wall. He rests his forehead there for a few seconds. His hands are resting as if he were praying. 2:52. He turns his back to the camera. His shoulders are tense. His head is down. 2:54. He disappears, without moving, without turning, without touching the door. From one split second to the next, he is no longer there. There's no distortion in the image, no recording errors, no time jumps. Just 1 second where it's theirs and the next it's not. Pauser, rewind, play, same result. I repeated the passage more than 10 times, my heart beating too loudly in my chest. I was shaking. My hands were cold, my fingers stiff. It wasn't possible. It wasn't logical. There was no loophole in protocol that could explain it. No police theory, no human error. Someone disappearing inside a locked cell without breaking the structure, without opening the door, without manipulating the system. It was ridiculous. But I was seeing it. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't an urban legend. It was a video. It was real. It was now. I shot up from my chair as if the floor were on fire. I paced the room, not knowing where to go. A high-pitched, thin sound echoed in the back of my head, like a buzzing sound that didn't come from outside, but from within. A kind of internal cracking sound that starts when something inside us breaks. My first impulse was to run back to the cell as if he might have reappeared, as if by some quirk of reality everything could go back to normal. But I knew. It was no use. He was gone. And in a way I couldn't even begin to understand. On the camera screen, the cell now looked bigger, empty, cold, like an open mouth waiting to swallow something else. I sat down again, and for the first time in many years, I felt like crying. Not because of the absurd scene I had just witnessed, but because of the certainty that was forming slowly and painfully inside me. That wasn't a trick. It was not an illusion. And worse, it wasn't an isolated case. That cell, that cell. I remembered, and I could no longer pretend that nothing was happening. Have you ever seen something that shouldn't be possible and happen right in front of you? The dawn no longer seemed like dawn. It had become something else, a state suspended between time and delirium, between the concrete and what we prefer not to name. I was there, standing still, staring at the empty cell on the camera, as if repeating the image could, at some point, make the man reappear, as if, by insisting, the absurd would decide to give in to logic. But he didn't give in. I slowly took off the headset, trying to breathe evenly, trying to maintain some lucidity, and for a few seconds I saw myself from the outside, as if I were watching myself, a police officer on the edge of reason, panting, sweating cold inside a surveillance room at 4 a.m., staring at a monitor that had just shown a human being vanishing into thin air. My first reaction, more instinctive than thought out, was to deny it. I began to mutter to myself, like an inverted mantra. It's a system error. It's a video glitch. It was a cut in the image, overlapping frames, digital compression, a software error, an error, an error. And each time I repeated this, the truth of what I had seen seemed to recede a little. But not enough. Never enough. I tried to rationalize. I logged into the police station's system, accessed the recording server, and opened the technical logs. Everything seemed normal. No errors recorded, no power outages, no interruptions in the backup, no frame loss recorded. Just that absence, that absurd and perfect absence in the midst of normality, like an invisible blemish that only appears when you look too closely. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to remember each step. I remembered Almeida bringing the man. I remembered him standing in the lobby. I remembered the file. I went back to the main system and entered the time of entry. Nothing. I reviewed the records from the entire night. No occurrences, no names added, no social security numbers, no identification, no formal entry, as if he had never existed. The screen gave me back an almost mocking emptiness, the kind of digital silence that screams. I stood up again. I paced around the room. I picked up the phone. I wasn't sure who to call. Almeida? He would be home by now. Maybe he didn't even want to talk about it anymore. Maybe he'd been told not to. Maybe it had all been erased more deliberately than I wanted to accept. I went back to the computer and tried to use the facial recognition system. I took a screenshot of the recording, the image of him staring at the camera. His face was clean, clear, visible. I uploaded it to the state database. I waited. Result: no matches found. I typed again, this time forcing an expansion of the search, opening it to the national system. I waited. Nothing. It wasn't just that he had no criminal record. It wasn't just that he had no identity. He simply didn't exist. No birth certificate, no medical records, no police report, no passport, no SUS registration, no INSS number, no nothing. I stopped. I felt my heart tighten inside my chest, as if someone was holding it with a hand full of ice. What if I was going crazy? It wasn't a throwaway hypothesis. The mind plays tricks. Fatigue distorts reality. I'd heard of cases like that before, people who see things that aren't there, people who swear something happened, but all they have is a memory that no one else can confirm. I brought my hands to my face and rubbed my eyes hard, as if that could erase what I had seen, but the scene remained there, etched in my mind with painful clarity. The man, the cell, the sentence, the disappearance. I took a step back and looked at the cameras again. They were all working. They were all recording. But just in case, I checked the night's technical diagnostic log. The system had a safety feature that recorded failures, even minor ones, in real time. And that's when I found it. A peak of oscillation. An isolated red dot. Time 3H54. Exactly at the moment he disappeared. The system identified a loss of frame, a single second of blankness, a blip of electronic silence, a glitch. Only in cell 3, only on that camera. No other part of the police station suffered any type of instability, and I knew what that meant. Someone or something directly interfered at that moment, and the system, even though sophisticated, did not have the time or capacity to react, like a reflex that did not happen, like a blink that the machine tried to avoid but failed. My hands started to shake. I opened the drawer. I grabbed my gun, not for safety, but because it was the only thing solid enough to remind me that I was still there, in the real world, that the floor still existed, that the metal was still cold, that I was still a cop. But all of that sounded too fragile now. I sat back down. I looked once more at the empty cell on the screen, and for the first time, I had the feeling that it wasn't empty, that there was something invisible, something that remained, something that didn't go away with him, something that waited. The room was freezing, but my body was sweating. My mind screamed for answers, but what echoed inside me was only his voice, repeating, "It's not here, it's now." What if he was right? What if it had never been about where, but about when? Would you trust your own eyes if everything around you told you that you saw wrong? It took me days to accept that I needed to go back there. That cell haunted me in every memory. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the exact moment he disappeared from the screen, as if he had been swallowed by something that was not physical. And even after reviewing the videos, searching for the logs, confirming the specific failure and the total absence of any record, my brain still insisted on finding explanations that did not involve madness or haunting. But it wasn't until I started digging outside the system that the pieces began to make sense. And, as always, what seemed impossible was just another secret buried too tightly. On the third day after the disappearance, I returned to the police station, even though it was off duty. The midday sun made the dirty facade even more tired. I walked straight past the reception desk, made minimal contact with my colleagues, and went to the archives room. I picked up the physical logbook for the week, something no one had used since we digitized everything. But there it was, page 212, entry on the day of the disappearance at 2:43 a.m. No one had written anything down. No signatures, no routine observations, nothing. It consumed me. I went after Almeida. He was acting strange, too quiet. He greeted me at the door with that look of someone who wanted to send me away without saying yes. But all I had to do was ask, "Do you remember what happened that night?" And his shoulders slumped. His silence wasn't fear of me. It was fear of whoever might be listening. It was the kind of silence that has seen too much. "You shouldn't touch that, Daniel." His sentence hit me like lead. My instinct screamed at me right away. He knew something, and he didn't want to tell me. I went home with my head on fire. And there, lying on the couch with the TV on mute, I began to piece together the fragments. I searched the parallel system, an old database that sometimes still held files without a direct connection to the current network. And that's where I found it. His face, another name, another registration number, Caio VR, Special Agent of the Internal Affairs Department, Internal Operation, Undercover. I opened the file. Date of entry into the investigation, 3 months ago. Objective: to investigate suspicions of involvement of members of the police force in a human trafficking scheme, falsification of reports and disappearance of evidence. Location of operation: our police station. My body froze. Caio, or whatever his real name was, wasn't there by chance. He was sent, and he disappeared the same way he arrived, without warning, without record, without a trace, at least not officially. But the detail that really made me shudder was the annex to the report. It said that he had already gathered compelling evidence against 2 officers in positions of command. and that he hid this evidence in a discreetly accessible location within the police station itself. The document ended with the sentence, "If something happens to me, look for where the cell breathes." Where the cell breathes? That sounded strange to me for hours, until I realized during the renovation of the old wing, 4 years earlier, that cell, Cell 3, had been closed for almost a week. There were rumors among the older ones about a technical passage that gave access to a maintenance area, something improvised used by workers and engineers to access the conduits behind the walls. But nobody was talking about it today, because officially that never existed. I didn't hesitate. I went back to the police station that same morning. It was Friday. Reduced shifts, little surveillance. I used my access badge to go unnoticed and went straight to the corridor of cells. Standing there, alone, made me break out in a cold sweat. But what I was looking for was greater than my fear. I touched the back wall of Cell 3 exactly where he had rested his forehead days before. I knelt down, gloves on, different sound, light metal behind the brickwork, a barely perceptible vibration. I ran to the tool room. I went back, wrench, force, dry noise, dust in the air. And then I found it, a disguised panel with screws hidden by old paint. Behind him was a narrow, dark, damp hole, exposed wiring, conduits, and at the end, a poorly sealed opening that led to a small compartment between the cell wall and the police station's storage room. Inside, a black box, made of metal, locked but fragile. I broke in. Paperwork, videos, recordings, names I knew, officers I had worked with, superiors who had trained me, people who had given me orders, all connected to a web of cover-up that now seemed bigger than anything I could have imagined. And there, at the bottom of the box, one last sheet. Disappearance is necessary. Truth must survive the body. It was at that moment that I understood. Kaio never wanted to be found. His disappearance was not a system error. It was a perfect execution, planned from within. The cell had been prepared in advance. The video failure was planned. The silence of my colleagues was bought or coerced, and I fell straight into the hole. I returned to the surface feeling my hands dirty, not only from dust, but from everything that had surrounded me for years without me, seeing it. And now, with that evidence in hand, I only had one question echoing in my head. How many more have disappeared without anyone questioning them? The weight of the metal box was still in my arms when I walked through the back door of the police station, my heart beating louder than my footsteps. The building seemed asleep, as if it was waiting for me to give up. But there was no going back. I knew too much, and deep down, I always knew that once you find the truth, it never lets you sleep in peace again. I went straight to the office of Sergeant Otasilio, the most senior officer in the house, and the person responsible for internal control of transfers and sensitive incidents. A respected man, with a low voice and eyes that hid more than they let on. From the beginning, something about him had always bothered me, but there had never been a concrete reason, until now. And now, everything inside me screamed that it was him I needed to talk to. The door was ajar. The light was on. He was there, sitting behind the desk, as if he had been waiting for me. "I was waiting for you, Daniel," he said, without looking up from the coffee he was stirring with a metal spoon. I closed the door softly behind me. I didn't say anything. I just placed the box on the table between us. The sound of metal on wood was sharp, the kind of sound that ends a conversation before it even begins. Otasilio looked at the box, sighed slowly, and then, as if he had lost his breath for a second, he pushed his chair back and leaned back. "You went further than you should have. My throat was dry. Still, I managed to speak. You knew, from the beginning." He looked up, but not with guilt, with weariness. "We know a lot of things that we don't say, Daniel. This here," he pointed to the ceiling, to the air, "is not the place for certain truths." He was from the Internal Affairs Department. He had evidence, and you erased it all. His silence confirmed it more than any words. The old sergeant watched me for a few seconds. Then he put the spoon down in the coffee cup with an almost ironic clink, crossed his arms and said quietly, he should never have stayed there. He was never supposed to spend the night, but he insisted. He said it was part of the plan, that he needed to experience what the others felt. But some people don't accept that kind of risk. Guys, or you. His gaze hardened. I'm just an old soldier. I keep the place running. I don't give orders. I just obey. But I knew, he admitted, without hesitation. And before you ask me more questions, let me tell you something. That cell, it's not just a cell. The way he said that made me take half a step back. What? Otacilio stood up and walked over to an old bookshelf in the corner of the room. He took out a thick file with papers yellowed by time. He pulled out a sheet, a blueprint of the police station, old, much older than any renovation I had ever heard of. Before it was a police station, this place was something else, an army depot. And before that it was a prison, one of those basement ones. Torture, confinement, isolation. It underwent renovation after renovation, but the original structure was never completely demolished. Do you know why? I shook my head, mute. Because it's hard work to erase the past. It's easier to hide, cover up, seal with paint, and use when it's convenient. He pointed with his wrinkled finger to a part of the plant. Here, side, corridor, technical access, passage to a compartment where they stored things that shouldn't be seen. They disappeared a lot of people there, during the dictatorship, after the dictatorship, and even recently. Cell 3 leads right there. Not on the current map, of course, but the old man, this one, doesn't lie. I felt my skin crawl. So you're telling me that it was used before? It wasn't just him. He looked down, and for a moment, he looked older than ever. Daniel, have you ever stopped to think why your brother was never found? That hit me like a point-blank shot. What? I was on duty that day, the day he disappeared. I remember your mother's face when she came here. I remember your file on the desk, your description of him. And I remember the rumor that they'd picked up a kid, someone who'd seen something they shouldn't have, a mistake. But they didn't document it. It wasn't in the system. I just heard it, and then it was all gone. My head began to spin. I leaned back in my chair, the air escaping as if I had been punched in the stomach. Are you telling me that my brother ended up in that cell? He didn't answer. That they disappeared with him in the same way? The sergeant took a deep breath, and then he said with a strange firmness, almost regretfully, sometimes we think that a cell holds a prisoner, but there are cells that hold a secret. I stood there, with my throat tight, my heart beating like an alarm stuck in my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break everything. But what paralyzed me was not hatred. It was the feeling that everything I ever wanted to know was right in front of me, and I didn't know if I had the strength to keep listening. Otacilio returned to his chair. He stared at me as if waiting for my decision, as if everything from that point on depended on what I would do with what I now knew. And it was true, because once you find out the monster was always inside, you can never sleep with the door locked again. But before leaving that room, I still asked, what if he knew? What if my brother knew what was going to happen? Otacilio did not hesitate. Maybe he knew. Maybe that's why he didn't run. Could you go on living, knowing that someone you love may be gone, within a system you swore to protect? Asking for leave was easier than it should have been. There was no resistance, no questioning. I filled out the form with shaking hands, delivered it in person to the commander's office, and he simply nodded. His eyes avoided mine the entire time, as if he knew, as if he were part of the same machine that had been turning for decades inside there, grinding bones, erasing names, silencing memories. No one asked why. No one even pretended to be surprised. Deep down, everyone in that police station carries something that they would rather keep in the shadows. And when someone decides to leave before it destroys them inside, silence is the only possible response. In the days that followed, life was on hold. I slept little. My cell phone was turned off and the windows were always closed. The light bothered me. So did the sounds. Even the sound of the wind seemed to carry broken sentences, like whispers that never finished being said. The box with the documents was locked in an old cabinet at the back of my room. The evidence was there. Videos, reports, copies of the internal affairs files, the original floor plan of Cell 3, the renovation records, everything. I could have handed them over. I could have sent them to the press, made an anonymous complaint, set the internet on fire, but I didn't. Because fear is something that sticks to your soul like rust, and the more you try to get rid of it, the more it spreads. I knew what I had discovered. I knew what it meant. I knew their names. I knew their faces. But I also knew who they were, where they were, who was protecting each of them. The truth was not just a weapon, it was a curse, and I wasn't ready to carry another one. Sometimes I think I was a coward, other times I think I was too human to continue. I never went back to the cell. I didn't have the courage. I avoided walking down the hallway even when I went there, months later, to sign my final release. The sound of my own footsteps in that wing made me nauseous. The smell made me shrug. There was something there that hadn't been cleaned or repainted, something that had remained trapped between the walls, waiting, or maybe someone. Nowadays, I pass by the police station from time to time, from a distance, from inside my car. The facade is still the same. The faded sign, the same crack in the tile on the side, the same 3 cement steps that lead up to the reception, but now there are new bars on the cells. It was one of the first things they did after the emergency retirement. They said it was for safety, but I know it wasn't. Every time I pass by there, I don't look directly at it. I only notice it briefly, in the reflection of the car window, in the shadow that moves too quickly, in the strange glow of a poorly positioned camera. Cell 3 is still there, locked, but it doesn't feel empty. It never seemed like it. Every time I walk past it, I feel like someone is still there, not waiting to leave, but waiting go out the wrong way. And that's why I still keep everything. The videos, the notes, Kaio's recordings, the plan, because one day, someone might need to know, someone might want to understand. Someone might do what I didn't have the courage to do, but until then, I just try not to overthink it. I try to forget the sound of that voice repeating, "It's not here, it's now." And I try to believe that somewhere my brother understood why I didn't find him in time. If this story gave you goosebumps, made you think, or even reminded you of someone, then it was worth every minute, right? Here, each story is more than just a story. It's an experience that you feel firsthand, as if you were living it yourself. Now you can be a part of this. By liking and subscribing, you help other people find this type of content that we almost never have anyone to share it with. And tell me in the comments, write the word that. That's it. That way I'll know you stuck around until the end, and that you're ready to dive into the next case, which, between you and me, is even more disturbing than this one. It's right there on the screen. Just be careful who might be watching you while you watch.